This lecture will discuss the topics of moral obligation and moral injury in the context of war. We're going to be looking at the work of Camilo Mac Bica, who has written extensively on ethics and war. Bica teaches philosophy at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Much of his philosophical writing about the morality of war is grounded in his own experience as a Marine who fought during the U.S. war in Vietnam. He's an activist for peace and social justice and the coordinator of Veterans for Peace in Long Island. To understand Bica's argument, we need to slowly parse the terms he uses and the assumptions he's making. So we're going to begin with looking at the list of duties that he argues should govern our actions when it comes to immoral wars. By emphasizing duties and obligations, Bica is using a deontological approach to analyze moral duties and behaviors towards immoral wars. Deontology derives from the Greek word for duty and refers to a branch of philosophy that studies duties and obligations. He tells us that the duties he will be referring to are either proscriptive or prescriptive, and so I want to make sure that we know what that means. For proscriptive or negative duties, we can think of actions that we should not do because they are immoral or wrong. My example here is not really a serious immoral act, but it will hopefully get the point across. So cutting in front of someone else in line could be a proscriptive or negative act because it is a norm that tells us we should not take this action because it is wrong. In other words, it's unfair to the person in line. A prescriptive or positive duty would be something that we should do because it is morally right. Holding the door open for someone is a norm that we usually follow because it is helpful to someone else. So now that we have a handle on those terms, we can go back to Bica's list of duties and see how some duties require us not to do certain things, like fight in an immoral war or support those who run that war, and certain things that we should do, like protest immoral wars and support troops qua human beings. So let's consider the first two proscriptive duties. He argues that as moral agents, we are obligated not to fight in an immoral war, and we are not obligated to help those who prosecute that war. This means that those politicians or officials who lead the war and the soldiers who fight in the war. This last point sounds controversial, and perhaps it is, because it goes against our militarized culture that tends to view military service as positive and patriotic, which is also a trait that tends to be viewed positively. But notice that Bica uses the phrase troops qua warrior. Qua is another way of saying as. So Bica is saying we should not support the troops as warriors. But what exactly does that mean? Our prescriptive duties include opposing and protesting immoral wars. It also requires us to support the troops qua human beings, the troops as human beings. What does that mean? Doesn't that conflict with the previous duty? I want to also backtrack a little and make sure that we understand the term morality. There's apparently some disagreement and difference in how some philosophers use the term, but we're going to use this definition, which says that morality refers to certain codes of conduct put forward by a society or a group, such as a religion, or accepted by an individual for her own behavior. So it's a set of actions that we learn from society or specific groups that we belong to. Morals are also value judgments. In other words, they are actions or beliefs about what we think is right or wrong, good or bad. Those are value judgments. So when we judge an action as being bad or wrong, like cutting in line, that is a moral. Like it is wrong to steal from others. Ethics and morals are often used interchangeably, but this definition from the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs It says that ethics are rules based on what is morally good or bad. So we need morals to determine the rules or ethics that we create and follow. And so if stealing is bad, then we can create a rule against stealing. Can morals and ethics conflict? Yes. For example, an individual can believe that it is always wrong to kill another human being, and this belief can be based on her religion, let's say. But if she lives in a country that promotes patriotism and militarism, then there's a good chance that her moral will conflict with a larger society's ethic, which says that citizens must defend their country through acts of war, which may or may not require killing other human beings. I wanted to talk about morals because Bika begins by giving us the moral foundation for his entire argument. He says that his argument is based on the principle of respect for persons, that all humans possess inalienable rights, which morally requires that we treat all humans as ends in themselves and not only as a means to achieving our own ends. We've heard that phrase before in Kant, but let's make sure that we understand it fully. So you might have heard the phrase, a means to an end. It means when you use something or someone to accomplish a goal or an objective. For example, education is a means to an end. My college degree is a resource or tool that I will use to achieve my goal, my end. For Kant, Bika, and many others, it is immoral to use people in order to achieve a goal. For example, when a country uses its troops to win a war, they are using troops or humans as a means to an end, to win a war. And for Bika, this is morally wrong because humans must not be used as a means. They are only ends in themselves. The next term Bika gives us is warism. So I'd like you to read this description of a warist and put it in your own words. Here, Bika cites a passage from Dennis Prager and his warist position. Read it and share your thoughts about what Prager is saying. A warist would argue that it is wrong to protest a war and claim to support the troops because protesting a war can demoralize or alienate the troops who fight it. And Bika uses the example of protests against the U.S. war in Vietnam. So watch this video to see how the troops who fought in World War II and Vietnam were treated differently because of the support or lack thereof for the war itself.